Hello, everyone. My name is George. I'm the head of product at Southern Cross. And I guess to provide you a bit of background on me, I've been on both ends of AI deployments. So I've been on the technical side and I've also been on the business side. As many of you guys know, SEX is launching the Crux webinar series. So every Friday, 9:30 a.m., a member of the team will jump on and talk about a topic related to AI. Today's topic is POC to production. And as a person that's been on both technical and business, I understand how important it can be. There's a technical side in ensuring success, and then there's the business side. And they're both interrelated, especially with AI projects, so much more than software projects. AI really requires their technical implementation to be incredibly sound and relevant to the business requirements, the business success. And so that's what I'm here to talk about today. So you can see that subheading, 88% of AI pilots never ship. It's a shocking statistic, and I'll get into that more as we go. So today we're going to look through the landscape, what's actually happening in the market today. And I think a lot of that will actually shock you. Why POCs fail, right? The 5 patterns we're seeing across our customers and why they approach us to make POCs successful. The patterns that we implement that work, and we've seen this even with successful clients when they do it themselves. What are the patterns? What are they doing to ensure success? The infrastructure decisions, which is quite important to an AI project actually being successful. It's very different to software, and I'll get into why. And then the last bit, which is the most practical element of this presentation, I want to give you a 10-question checklist. This checklist will allow you to be more successful with your AI implementation. So let's get started with the landscape. 95% of Gen AI pilots fail to deliver measurable P&L impact. That's huge. Imagine the amount of automation that Gen AI provides. I mean, you have marketing materials automatically generated. People do short clips, images, and in a lot of cases, they even create entire slide decks with different brochures, entire campaigns of Gen AI. And if it doesn't produce the perfect end product, at least it gives you a really good starting point. And with all that efficiency, it's still unable to produce a P&L impact. Through cost savings or more marketing and more productivity, it's still unable to do it. And that's a very strange statistic. Similarly, 88% of AI POCs never make it to production. So this includes all your LLM implementations, your machine learning implementations. 88% of them never make it to production. That's a very, very confronting statistic. And the last statistic, 42% of companies scrapped AI initiatives from 2025. But actually, this came from 2024, where it was only 17%. So 17% of companies were scrapping AI initiatives in 2024. From 2024 to 2025, we've seen such an increase in AI capabilities, not only in what it can do, how it can process information, the speed in which it responds, but also the precision. We saw in 2024 a lot of hallucination in AI, where in 2025, we see a lot of that becoming pretty accurate, especially in niche use cases. But even with that, we see 42% of companies scrapping AI. That's incredible. And also, I want you to think about even your own daily life. I mean, in 2025, you probably used a lot more AI than 2024. And you would have used apps that use a lot of AI too. But companies are unable to implement it. So let's get into why. Why is it that these POCs are not working? Why is it that companies cannot implement AI deployments properly? Well, we see 5 patterns. The first pattern is the success criteria. And I know what you guys are thinking. This is obvious. Come on. But it's actually not obvious because it's very different to software, which is what a lot of our background is, right? So I worked with David Keane, who's the CEO of SEX. But his previous company was called Big Tin Can, and that was a software as a service platform. And we provided that to Nike, we provided Amazon advertising, a lot of different brand names. And those software implementations were always so different to data-driven implementations. And a key part of that is the success criteria. You see my real example there, financial services document review AI was 95% accurate in testing. But the team never actually defined what accuracy was. And even if you do on a high level, sometimes the business users have different use cases for how that accuracy should be calculated. And so having that conversation up front is so important. What is the success criteria we're trying to achieve here? And how are we going to measure it? So not only defining what the success criteria is, but how are we going to measure it? What are the prompts? What are the situations? What are the data inputs? And then what is the expected output? And how do we calculate it? You really have to get into the detail there. Another aspect of this is do not set a success criteria that is about replacing people. Or don't set a success criteria that's about automating something end to end. The reality is that AI is not there yet. And even if it is, it doesn't have access to as many tools as a human does. Now, AI might be able to access things with API endpoints, but there are a lot of tools, a lot of legacy systems that don't have API endpoints. And so don't look at it as something to replace people or replace entire processes. We've seen this fail at CBA, actually. There was a news article in ABC and the AFR with another use case. But with CBA specifically, they hired AI bots to take over their call center staff. You can't really do that. Once they did that, a few months later, they ended up hiring people back because they realized that the AI was making so many mistakes. And it could be a problem with how it was tuned, could be a problem with the use case. But at the end of the day, AI is there as a partner, as a tool for the person to use. It is not a replacement. The second issue we see a lot is this demo to production chasm. So a lot of software projects, you build a POC, it's completely separate to production. Once it gets approved, you really scrap what you built in the POC stage for software. That is not the case for AI. What you build for data-driven projects must be very similar to what's in production. And the reason for that is because a lot of these AI projects have data inputs, real-world data inputs. Whether you're using a chatbot where you're prompting it, you're actually typing in, uploading documents, interacting with it, or it's a data flow where you're extracting data points or use cases or case studies from a corpus of documents. That's real data. And if your POC decided to use a very easy PDF or very specific repeatable prompts, that's not real. And so once you take it to production, people are going to feel that the production reality is very different to what they tested in POC. And so that's what you don't want, right? You need your POC, and I'll get into the infrastructure side of it as well, but you need your POC to literally be a smaller version of production. Now, this third one is pretty major. I mean, the risk guys are always piping on about it, and I know I never believed it was that important for software, but it is definitely cardinal to AI deployments. Where is the data that you're actually going to use? What data is going to be flowing in? What data is going to be flowing out? And then where is all that data going to sit? And can you audit all of that? That's the risk. You need to ensure that all of that is compliant, and furthermore, you don't want somebody screaming at the end of the production build, hey, we've got to block this whole thing because it's a massive risk to the business, right? And so you want your risk and legal guys at the start of the project rather than at the end. It's a huge part of making sure your POC is going to be successful. Last two patterns, wrong stakeholders. And I don't really mean wrong stakeholders. I mean stakeholders that are not willing to come along, right? Stakeholders that really don't believe in AI. You see, AI deployments is very different to software. If you build something in software, let's say you're building a web page, right? The business stakeholder at the end of the build says, you know what, I want it in red, not blue. It's pretty easy to fix, right? But AI implementations are iterative. They really need to come along and provide you all the changes as you go. And then as they're providing you changes, they're going to think of things that they wouldn't have thought about when you ask them questions because they're now using the POC. And they'll come up with all these other nuances and specific case studies that probably wasn't relevant to the initial POC build, but is cardinal to its success. And you're only going to get that if you have stakeholders that are coming along, right? They're not there at the end. They're at the beginning. They're there during the build, and they will ensure the success of the POC because they came along with the build. And so make sure you are able to prioritize your stakeholders' time capacity for that as well. The last pattern we've seen a lot is POCs built on a laptop or POCs built with APIs from Claude or APIs from something inappropriate, right? Maybe using a Chinese model randomly, and so all your data's gone to China. And then the moment you need to push it to production, it's like, well, no, we actually need to redo the whole thing. And because we need to redo the whole thing, we've realized now that there's all these other requirements that we didn't think of because we built on the laptop and we're using Chinese APIs, right? You need infrastructure that can scale, right? Your POC should be built on the cloud, but it should be built on a cloud with risk and legal considerations. Is your data allowed to sit there? And once you want to push it to production, it's really a scale issue. It's not a rebuild issue. Well, that's enough of negative. I mean, those are the 5 areas where POCs fail. Let's talk about where it actually works, right? And I've seen this done very successfully in many different places. The first is, and a lot of engineers don't like this, but it's pretty important. Identify the pain, the problem, and then quantify that pain. Don't quantify it and then say, you know what, you're going to replace X, Y, Z. Have assumptions that are gentle. For example, X FTE spends X amount of time doing X task. Don't just assume you're going to replace the whole thing, right? Okay, this will make the task faster by 70, 80% with some supervision, right? And so that's your quantifiable business benefit for the problem the business faces, right? Or maybe it's more productivity, right? But you want to identify that dollar pain because even the POC is going to cost money. It's not a software build where it's just done in a few minutes. It's not a small build, it's not a big build, but it's a medium build. It's a small miniature version of production that is going to require some investment. And so you want to make sure that you're able to quantify that dollar benefit so you can get prioritized. Now, you see the fourth pattern of success being defined success metric. I think I've talked about that a lot already. And I also did design 2B in a as-is workflow. I think I've talked a lot about during the problem elements of this webinar. So I won't go through that again. So what should the pilot production pipeline or project look like, right? I see scoping being 2 to 4 weeks, which is a little bit longer than what a lot of people anticipate. I know a lot of companies, especially startup companies, say, hey, you know what, you can get everybody into a room, figure out the scope in like a day. The problem with that is scoping actually requires you to not only look at the business problem and the job to be done statement, you also need to look at what do you need in order to achieve the desired outcome. And so you need to scope in all the infrastructure, you need to scope in all that cost, you need to scope in all the data sources that you want to bring in and whether or not you're allowed to, right? And so scoping is more of a technical and a business scoping exercise. It's not just, let's just get requirements and get it done. Because in software, honestly, you didn't need to do any of that because generally anything you wanted to build in software was generally possible. You didn't really need data inputs for most of that. It was tweaking, it was changing, it was quite binary in its success or no success, right? Where in AI, it's more complicated. You have a lot more inputs, you have infrastructure considerations, risk considerations that you need to take on board early. And then at the end of the day, what is the business benefit? And so it's a bigger assessment than it was historically. So I'd give scoping 2 to 4 weeks and I'd take it quite seriously. And then you see for pilot and production, I have pilot 4 to 8 weeks and then pilot also 4 to 12 weeks. And what I mean there is your pilot is part of your production build. It's not something you throw away. It's something that slowly scales. And so as you're building your pilot, your POC, think of it as you really are building a smaller version of what it'd be in production. And anything that you don't build, disclose it. Make sure people are aware of the costs, considerations, and other things that you need to take into account when you build in production. And also state if the assumptions are wrong, this is what the impact is to production and how it could change the picture, right? And so allow your business to make the decisions of what you build in POC and what you don't. But whatever you build, ensure it's scalable. Now, the last bit of this is AI deployments are not kind of build and leave it, right? You need to continue to manage it, support it. There's going to be new models, new capability. The business is changing, right? So there are going to be different data inputs. There's going to be different required data outputs. And so this is a iterative, ongoing process. It's not something you can just kind of build and leave. Now I'm realizing I'm going a little bit over here, so I'm just going to go through this really quickly. But essentially, when you build data-driven products, you need to ensure that you're data ready. And a lot of that is making sure a lot of that data actually makes sense. It's governed. The data that's being fed into those databases are not wrong, right? In some cases where some API endpoint stops collecting data, nobody notices. And then when you try to use that data for AI, it fails, right? And so ensuring that it's clean, it's accessible via API, it's classified appropriately, etc., is pretty important. And also, I already spoke about this, treat AI as a product, not a project. Now, the infrastructure decisions that you need to make. So there's kind of three infrastructure decisions you can go down. One, right, it's a public APIs, easiest, fastest way to build a POC. Problem with that, though, is you're giving your data, all your data out. Data is an asset, and so you're really just feeding it out. And then there are compliance and legal considerations. If you have customers that are PII, sorry, data on customers that's PII, are you feeding that data out, which is not compliant and not okay? The other potential solution is self-hosted, so you kind of bring a GPU, put on the floor next to you, kind of start building right off that. It's great from a compliance and risk point of view, but at the same time, it's very slow to production. I mean, to set that up and then get it going, get the right models on there, making sure it scales. Too many people using it, it crashes. There's a whole story, right? And so we see the best in between is continue using cloud, but making sure you have a provider that is completely sovereign. It's not collecting your data, you're collecting it, and also is price competitive, so you don't have any scale issues. Now, I think I've gone through this pretty well, but there are specific nuances. So when you build a POC to production, a lot of your users would have already used Claude or ChatGPT, so they're probably expecting AI to be that. You're not competing with that. You can build something better than that for their specific use case. But a lot of people's exposure to AI is just that. Like you talk to them about the AI, they're just like, that's it. That's what it is. They don't know what reinforcement learning is. They don't know what machine learning is, and they don't know what else LLMs can do other than answer their questions, right? And so don't get into the trap of competing with public LLMs. The rest of this, I think I've already gone through pretty well. And so to end this, the checklist that you guys can use when you build a POC, right? These are the 10 questions you should ask yourself. In my humble opinion, if you're able to answer 7 out of 10, you're on your way to success, right? So have you defined a business metric this AI project will move? Can you quantify the current cost or the revenue in hours or dollars that you're going to give to the business? Have you identified 2 or 3 stakeholders that will come along for the build? Is your compliance and risk team or legal team involved from day one? That's during scoping and during POC. Do you know where your data will be processed and can you prove it? So if it's going anywhere, or if your inputs are going anywhere, your outputs are going anywhere, do you know where it's going and are you sure that's where it's going? Define what good enough looks like. And that goes back to that success metric definition. What will push us to production? Because when you take it to production doesn't mean you stop iterating and stop improving. It just means it's good enough for production. Does your POC architecture map to a realistic production path? Does it scale? Is there a named business owner for the AI system post-deployment? Because you don't just leave it alone and drop it. It's going to improve over time and business requirements are also going to change. Have you budgeted for ongoing maintenance? So do some token estimations there for the usage. And the last bit is, can you explain the AI's decisions to people that don't know what AI is? And it's kind of like software, you could just read the code and be like, this is why it happened. AI, what thinking, what process did that AI go through that made it draw the conclusion it did? But yeah, that is the presentation. I realize I've only left 3 minutes for questions, but I'll go through them now. If anybody has any other specific questions, feel free to drop them down in the chat and I'll answer them accordingly. Okay, I see some questions have come through. So every team in my business has been mandated to use AI. How do we tackle how do we prioritize the use cases? So, okay, so I always kind of like to do it. One of my previous bosses explained this to me, where you create a massive graph on a wall, if you have it, or a whiteboard, where the x-axis is effort and the y-axis is value. Right? So the business stakeholders will kind of drag your post-it note, your idea, your use case, up and down the value line. And then the engineers will drag it up and down the effort line. And so what you get, sorry, left and right. And so what you get is basically post-it notes that represent value and effort on this massive graph, right? And people can move it around. And usually, basically, the least amount of effort and the most value are the projects that you jump on. What models are available in your cloud? SEX.ai has a lot of models. We're going to be bringing in what we're really excited for is DeepSeek 4. It's going to be quite powerful. And also we have Minimax today, which is basically Opus 4.6 competitor, and it's a Chinese model. It's a Chinese variant of that. Now, because our models are completely geo-isolated on sovereign infrastructure, you can use the Chinese models without any worries, right? And so we're not going to be collecting any data. We're not going to be sending any data. It's all geo-isolated and isolated to your instance as well. And so you can use some of the best, fastest, and cost-effective models out there, especially on our infrastructure. Just go to sex.ai to see all the models that are available today. And there are quite a few other questions coming in, but I might have to leave it there because I've run out of time. Feel free to reach out. As I said at the beginning of this presentation, 9:30 Friday, every morning, we're going to be doing a webinar. The team's going to be presenting on many different topics and what we're seeing in the market and what we're seeing with our customers as well. Feel free to drop any questions you have or reach out if you'd like to get in touch. The Crux webinar series continues. Thank you.